Good morning. Good morning, everyone. My name is Catherine Newcomer. I am a faculty member in the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration at the George Washington University. And I'm delighted to say I've been working, co-hosting with REI 9 years, these sessions on grants management. And we have worked with the National Association of Grants Management folks for almost that whole time in putting together this annual survey. And so I want to welcome you to hear the results of this year's survey. We, in teaching students in public policy and public administration, uh, place a good emphasis on the importance of understanding grants management. As probably everybody on this call knows, enormous amount of money goes from the federal government in a variety of grant programs to across the nation. There are also grants from a lot of foundations, and people need to understand how to manage both from the grantors and from the grantees. There's a lot of information and a lot of federal guidance. And so we, along with the National Grants Management Association and REI, try to help sort through the intricacies. So welcome. I'm delighted that you're here, and we have some exciting findings to share. I'd like to introduce our other partner, Scott Schluffler, who is the president of the National Grants Management Association, to also say welcome. Scott.
Thanks, Catherine. So it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. Thank you to REI. Thank you to TW for partnering with NGMA on the survey. As Catherine mentioned, I'm the president of NGMA. The association is focused on the grants managers themselves. That gives us some helpful insight into the challenges and opportunities that grant managers face and have, both within the federal government and then on the non-federal side. So the grant managers that are members of our association include individuals who work for the federal government, state government, local government, Indian tribes, nonprofits, and for-profits. The focus is on the grant manager and their career path and career growth, a lot of education and training, in particular in recent years and including in the coming years through the Certified Grant Management Specialist certification. So as we talk through the panel today, you'll hear a lot of focus on that aspect from me. And thank you to our other panelists as well. So Heather, I'll turn it to you.
Great, thanks, Scott. Good morning, my name is Heather Morgan. I lead our grants offering at REI Systems. REI has a long history spanning over 30 years, providing grants management solutions across federal, state, local, and nonprofit agencies. As Kathy mentioned, REI has been conducting the annual grants management survey in collaboration with NGMA and George Washington University since 2016. We really want to keep a pulse on the grants community, understand current challenges, priorities, and opportunities for improvement. Each year, we share the key findings from the survey at these grants management breakfast forums and invite leaders from the grants community to participate in a panel and share their organization's experience and grants management best practices in relation to the survey findings. So Ashley, if you can go ahead and pull up the slides, I will share our agenda for today. So as we go through the forum today, I'll briefly talk about the survey and this year's demographics, and then talk to the key takeaways from the survey responses. We want to spend the majority of the time on the panel itself. So during the panel, we do welcome the audience to put questions in the chat, and Jeff Myers, our panel facilitator, will accommodate as many as he can, keeping in mind the time constraints, as well as the different topic areas that we want to be sure and cover. You can go to the next slide. This is the 9th year that we've conducted the survey. Its purpose is to inform you, the grants community, of what's going well and where there are pain points while tracking trends over time, with the ultimate goal of creating a positive impact on grants management. Because we're looking at trends across years, we do maintain some level of consistency in the questions that are asked, but we do make modifications each year to reflect current issues and the ever-changing environment that you all work in. Thousands of grant professionals are invited to respond each year. So I do want to extend a sincere thank you to those of you attending today that participated in the survey. The higher the participation, the better representative results and reduced risk of bias. Next slide. So we had a total of 650 responses this year, which is just under our record count of 659 from last year. 60% of the survey respondents were from federal, state, and local governments, and 40% were non-government, with the majority of that demographic being from grant recipients. In terms of years of experience, about 2/3 have more than 5 years of grants experience, with almost half of respondents having that deep grants experience of 10 years or more. Okay, and now I'll go ahead and talk to the key takeaways from the survey this year. And I did want to note that we'll be sharing this deck after the event to all the participants, and included in the deck will be the detailed survey results. So you'll have all of the details on each of the survey questions from this year's survey. So the first takeaway is on efficiency. So to help reduce burden on both grantors and grant recipients and create efficiency, respondents want more automation, better tools and technology with more data sharing and fewer systems to have to interact with, more streamlined processes with more standardization. Another challenge with efficiency is just the coordination across agencies and departments that can be inefficient and result in duplication of effort and sometimes conflict. The second key takeaway is around artificial intelligence. So we're starting to see AI gain traction in grants management, particularly the use of generative AI. A little over 20% of grant recipients indicated using Gen AI. Comments indicated they're primarily using it to help with applications and post-award reporting. Granting agencies are also starting to leverage AI, but proceeding with caution, often starting with pilots. And respondents indicated that pre-award and post-award phases were the phases of the grants life cycle that have the most promise for the use of AI. The third finding is on measuring performance outcomes. We're seeing agencies still continuing to struggle with this. Similar to prior years, about half of respondents don't know or are unable to effectively measure outcomes. Of those who can, only 5% indicated that performance fell. So we're seeing in terms of why they're unable to effectively measure outcomes, lack of staff and tools as the top reasons, followed by a lack of defined performance measures to be able to effectively analyze the outcome data. The fourth takeaway is regarding the 2024 2 CFR 200 updates. This was a new question that was added this year. And respondents said the most impactful outcomes that they feel will result from these updates are reduced administrative burden, simplification of NOFOs to reduce barriers of entry, and standardization of core data elements for reporting. There are some challenges, though, with implementing the updates. A big one was making sure the information gets disseminated and the staff is getting educated on the changes and how to implement them. A number of people also felt that there was some lack of clear guidance and that some of the updates are open to interpretation. And another common challenge was the timing for applying the new regulations. Right, for existing grants, they need to comply with the prior rules, while with the new grants following the updated regulations. So this adds a lot of complexity in managing the grants. And then the fifth key takeaway was on retaining well-qualified staff. 72% of this year's respondents indicated that well-qualified grants management staff is a critical success factor. And this has consistently been cited over the years as the top success factor for grants management. But on the flip side, 48% of respondents identified attracting and retaining well-qualified staff as one of their top 3 challenges. And then our sixth takeaway is on training. Respondents want more training, indicating training leads to stronger performance outcomes, better compliance, and higher quality. Comprehensive grants management training was the area most cited as being beneficial to grant staff. That being said, only about half of granting organizations require that its staff receive training, and only 43% recommend and offer training to its grant recipients. As we're seeing some agencies facing potential staffing cuts while still maintaining a heavy workload, we expect training is going to continue to be an area of need moving forward. Okay, so with that, I will go ahead and kick off the panel discussion. Before the panel starts, I wanted to introduce the full panel. So if we can go to the next slide. Jeff Myers, who is a Senior Director at REI, will be facilitating today's panel. Jeff has been involved with the survey since its inception and brings years of grants knowledge and expertise. On the panel itself, we have Scott Scheffler, President of the National Grants Management Association. From the state of Illinois Governor's Office of Management and Budget, we have Lori Beeler. She's the Director of Grant Accountability and Transparency Unit. From the DC Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants, we have Director Jennifer Porter, along with her Administrative Officer, Jessica Harris. And from the Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction, or OSPI, we have Amy Harris, who is the Director of Federal Fiscal Policy and Grants Management, and Alyssa Ibanez, who is a Program Supervisor. And with that, I will now pass it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Heather. And I just want to say, over my many years of working with grants, that I really believe that the purpose of grants management is an outstanding one, because I think that state, local governments, tribal entities, nonprofits are frankly much closer to customers and often make better decisions than the agencies at the federal level that may be best at raising the money and have the congressional or legislative mandate. I think, however, that there is, of course, always room to improve, and I hope that this forum both stokes some ideas and innovations in you as you hear about the ideas that the panelists, as well as some of your colleagues, have, and that it also serves as an appropriate and an effective tool to raise attention to some of the challenges and opportunities the grants management community faces. In the past, for example, some of the results of this survey and your voices have made their way into the president's management agenda with respect to, for example, reducing grantee burden. Also, I'll give just a 10-second plug for REI. REI offers both grants management services to a number of federal agencies related to health, scientific research, environmental issues and such, but also offers those services and systems to state and local governments. And I think that's actually one of the places where I hope the most opportunity for improvement exists in the current technology environment, using things like artificial intelligence to make much more efficient and less burdensome the transmission of information to share between agencies at the same level, such as between states, but also between grantors and grant recipients, whether it be at the state level down to counties or whether it be at the federal level to states. I think that artificial intelligence could contribute to those, and some of the software solutions that REI can offer can help agencies do that if they are interested. But let's turn to some of the specific sorts of the survey results. And also, let's not be blind to the current context. Frankly, I think that there are a number of programs, if you're following some of the federal news, that there may be either more grant money or grant money may be entirely eliminated. So there's a big set of uncertainty ahead of all of us, I think. And I think what I hope some of our panelists are able to do is to share a little bit about how they're dealing with that. I also think that there are perhaps some unseen or maybe not very well focused upon opportunities. So I think that in some instances, let's call it out, for example, with the Department of Education, if the department is eliminated, a number of the activities of federal staff will end, but there is an expectation that the funding will continue, and perhaps with a great deal more flexibility for state and local governments that are receiving those grants. So there may be a dramatic expansion of some of the flexibility that state and local governments have to use those grants as they see fit. So those are a couple of the kinds of topics that I think that led us to want to have a close engagement from this panel. And I hope that a number of you who may have questions will type them into the chat as well. Of course, we'll not likely be able to answer all the questions in the chat, but again, this is to stoke the discussion. So let's start out and ask both sides of that initial sort of a topic about some of the potential impacts of cuts. So we've framed it with the first question as, what would happen if grant funding for your agency or programs were cut substantially as the federal government tries to reduce government spending? And let's just pick an arbitrary figure of 30%. And then I'll bookend that with a question of, well, if an agency saw its end, or at least a substantial reduction in force at the federal level, and perhaps did substantially increase the flexibility of those grants, what would that mean for your organization? And we've kind of organized this a little bit in advance, so I would like to ask whether or not, Jessica, you want to share your thoughts in response to either or both of those questions, and then we'll ask one or two other of the panel members their thoughts as well. Jessica?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, for that question. I actually want to kick that over to Director Jennifer Porter, and she can talk about our funding model.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you, Jeff, to REI, GW, and NGMA for such a great convening and very timely discussion. Here in the Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants in the District of Columbia, we are proud that we have very significant local investments in both of our victim services and our justice grants portfolio. And because of that, we actually employ a community driven and a community implemented grant program, but we also implement a braided funding model in which the federal investments as well as the local investments are braided to be able to support our local grants and programs. This allows for the ever-changing federal priorities and or local investments for us to be able to maintain what is our number one priority of sustaining those existing services and programs in community. It takes for a very skilled grant management and technical team to be able to maintain such initiatives, but it also supports our priorities in building capacity within the community. We have a nationally recognized capacity building program in which we work with grantees to develop their internal capacity, their financial readiness, so that they can be competitive for other funds outside of both federal and local investments to be ready to continue to sustain those services for what could potentially be a cut in this scenario.
Jennifer, can I follow up just for a moment? You've described braided funding, which I suspect is familiar to some of the audience, but perhaps not all. Let me just ask you bluntly, would you want to encourage federal agencies to change or relax some of their constraints on the grants that they make to allow more braided funding, which I kind of think about as, well, that's diversification. It's kind of like, I don't want to put all my investment eggs for my retirement in one basket. I want some diversification to make sure that I don't face too much risk. So would you want more? And are there particular places where you think that would be most helpful? How have you made this work that some of the other audience members might find interesting?
Sure. It's come at a challenge. We absolutely would encourage for particular areas in specific investments for us to be able to expand it. What it's caused us to have to do for our grantees is for them to maintain the federal compliance for even for our local investments. And while for some of our locally funded programs, it's a challenge. It allows for that flexibility of funding. So I would agree that allowing more flexibility would allow for us to have a greater opportunity for our investments to reach community.
And let me ask Lori Beeler, since you kind of represent a little bit of a different flavor of grant management, you have statewide responsibility as opposed to Jennifer and Jess, who have responsibility for just one program area in local government. Lori, my question to you is, presumably, if federal agency funding cuts impact grants, which I suspect they will in some instances, they may not impact all of the different grant programs that the state of Illinois receives. Tell me a little bit about kind of how contingency planning is happening right now that would be, that you may be helping some of your component units within the state of Illinois kind of prepare, even if you don't know or they don't know which all of those components might be impacted. Can you share any thoughts about that?
Yeah. Absolutely. And I want to echo Jessica and Jennifer's thoughts and thank you for such a wonderful discussion today. In Illinois, if we have a significant cut in our federal funding, we will not have the funds to be able to backfill those. So what we're doing in Illinois right now, we're looking at those federal programs. We're looking at the priority and the state's initiatives. So we're looking to align those, make sure that we're putting our funding so that it aligns with our initiatives. and what our overall program goals are. So a lot of the state agencies are currently gathering information and we're having those discussions ongoing.
And so it's interesting because Tricia Miller, a member of the audience, just put a comment in the chat, and I want to frame it in a question. She says, unless state funding levels are raised, I don't see how a reduction in federal funding would not result in a reduction in force at the state level or presumably local level. So my question is, of any of you panelists, do you see in the programs that are either your primary responsibility or that you care most about, do you see that there may be some state or local or other entity that steps in, your own or another one, that says, hey, we realize there are federal cutbacks, but this is really a priority in my jurisdiction. We're going to see some replacement of those lost federal funds by your local entity. Is that likely for any of you? And I'm hearing silence.
Yeah.
I think in the
It might be
district,
no.
in the district, our priority really is to maintain those core services. So at OVSJG, we fund healing in the community. So we're funding shelters, we're funding mental health services and care. So with a breakdown in that funding model, we'll have a direct impact on the communities that we serve. So we're really committed to working with our partners, at the executive office of the mayor and city council and other sister agencies to make sure that we can maintain that continuum of care. So that's an ongoing conversation. Obviously, we're going to continue to fund and maintain the services that exist in the district, but we'll sort of continue to have that conversation with those partners as things evolve.
So I'll draw a couple of conclusions and then ask anyone to either disagree or to amend them. And in a moment, I'll also ask Scott for his perspective because he's a little less at risk and also has a broad perspective. So my theory is grant recipients, especially recipients of grants from federal sources, should be doing some contingent planning. And that second, you may want to think about, and it's an unfair question I just asked, well, will your local government jurisdiction replace the federal funding? Because of course, that's kind of something that's up to the local policymakers and typically legislature and executive. So it's not really fair to ask you, will that happen? Just kind of, whether or not you think it's likely. But so my suggestion is, one, everybody who receives the federal grant money probably ought to be doing some contingent planning. And second, you maybe ought to be having some discussions with the policymakers and executives in your jurisdiction to see, are there programs that if they are cut with respect to the current grant funding sources from federal sources, are there ones that your jurisdiction wants to continue and would be willing to make some resources available, and if so, at what level? So I think kind of the message that I'm going to postulate is be proactive, do the contingent planning, make people aware who have some ability to do something about it locally, make them aware of that plan, and then let them weigh in on whether or not they would like to take action. Does anybody want to revise any of that postulate? And or then, Scott, would you like to offer any amendments to it? Hearing silence, or in REI, we have a rule, 7 seconds of silence means people agree. So we'll just assume that going forward, as long as you've got your microphone unmuted. Scott, what do you think?
I wanted to add a slightly different perspective to your point. And this is the perspective of the workforce component, the grant manager component. So in the survey, one of the successes from 2024 that was a top success was well-qualified staff. And simultaneously, one of the identified challenges was talent retention. And given the subject matter of the survey, I suspect that talent retention is focused on the grants managers and then the finance staff with the grants experience. The reason for this in 2024, and I think the reason we can expect it to continue in 2025, is that the grants landscape is becoming increasingly complex. And there's really two possibilities as we try to survey what's happening currently, with federal agency transformations, policy goal changes. There's one possibility, which we've just talked about, which is widespread funding cuts. If that happens, as we look at this, what will our challenges be in the coming year? I tend to think from a workforce standpoint or from the grant manager's perspective, those grant managers with 6 or more years of experience will be really important. I tend to think that the grants managers with 2 or less years of experience, if it's just broad-based funding cuts, we'll start looking at retraining into a new field. By comparison, if what we find is not funding cuts at those levels, but rather maybe modest cuts, but increased funding complexities, there we'll see the continued growth of the grant manager workforce and the increased demand for the grant manager workforce. So we don't know entirely which way that will go, but I think we'll know by August as we start to see federal budgets come out of Congress. And so I think as we look back at this time from the grants manager perspective, we'll be saying it was the best of times, it was the worst of times in terms of the workforce component. And so we'll see in August. My best guess is increased demand for grants managers. That's going to put pressure on local governments like the district, because state governments, nonprofits, for-profits will be hiring away their grants managers. But the good news is there will be more in the pipeline.
Let me draw one more conclusion, and I think it kind of will foreshadow a topic that will come up on a little later, which is communications are important. And if those of you who are following in the chat have noticed, Alyssa Ibanez, one of our panelists, has said, we're making a real proactive effort to communicate what some of the impacts will be and which kinds of communities and types of organizations, which types of school districts in her case are impacted. So that sounds to me like a terrific example of trying to communicate so that people at all levels, especially grant recipients, in their case school districts, in other case maybe a nonprofit or a transit or a health agency, but so that they also have a plan, an ability to plan. The other piece I think is that the two-way communication is important. And in my opinion and observation, does not happen as often or as effectively as it should. And I think there are two pieces to that. One is, how well are grant recipients doing at describing both their efficiency and the program outcomes that they're achieving, using numbers and quantified. And the other piece I think the community does a better job of is thinking about anecdotes that kind of have some human interest and grab attention, and being able to communicate those upward to the federal grant making agencies, as well as, frankly, to some of the politicians, whether they be members of Congress or even just at your state level or federal of the executive branches. Those communications, I think, will become even more important. But we'll have to talk about communications in a little bit. Let's ask the last question here, which is, if you think about the things, panelists, that you've been most successful at within the past year, 2024, will this current environment impede those, help those, or is it just unclear? And it looks to me like perhaps Amy or Alyssa might be on point to have something to offer here. Amy or Alyssa, do you want to share?
Absolutely.
Oh,
So
go ahead.
I would say it's an area that we're continuing to work on, but kind of looking at the prior question about flexibility. We work in a large bureaucracy. We're basically in a castle in Olympia in Washington State. And so we have a lot of people managing various grant programs that might fund different aspects of the initiatives that school districts are trying to implement. And so we've found that when we can really examine the grant program carefully to narrow down what are really the requirements and what are the opportunities for flexibility, and then communicate across grant programs, we're able to provide more flexibility and reduce duplication of efforts. So for example, in Washington, one of our initiatives is dual language, with the goal of students graduating bilingual and biliterate. And we collected from our school districts, what are some of the pieces of that you're struggling to implement? And then looked across grant programs to identify what the various grant programs could help support. And additionally, when a school district has an initiative that they're trying to implement based on their needs, they can come to us, and then we will, in a similar way across the grant programs, think about how can the various programs support you, and make sure that we're not erecting any barriers that are not really legally necessary to allowing the school districts to use that funding flexibly. And Amy, I think you had some ideas on that question also.
Yeah, and I think our good morning, everyone, by the way, but I think our panelists really touched on it. Like the themes that I'm seeing is flexibility and braiding and blending of federal funds, which aren't necessarily new concepts and things that we've been working with school districts even before the new administration. Before COVID, you know, we've had a lot of school districts see financial condition issues with declining enrollment and the end of COVID funding. And so, you know, just being creative and thinking outside the box and trying to help them, like Alyssa said, you know, navigate that and coming up with more flexible ideas on how they can use the federal funds with their state and local funds to really address the needs of students.
Amy, I want to, if we can actually move to the next slide, I want to use that as kind of the segue because the next question is, there is, especially at the federal level, a very heightened focus on efficiency, although it seems to apply to perhaps a number of different topics. But my question is there something that you have seen or experienced that's really made the biggest impact in improving your program or agency's efficiency? And again, I'd be happy to have input from any of our panelists because I think we're looking for ideas that may be useful to any range of audience members. What have you seen that's been the biggest impact on efficiency improvement?
Well, I can start this one off. So we moved to the GovGrants platform almost 4 years ago. Prior to that, we had a grant system in place for 20 plus years. So it was a huge change internally and externally for our users. And we saw this as an opportunity. Our exec team at OSPI, you know, this is a great time to really think about your processes and how to improve on those. So we focused on a few different things, reducing the number of competitive grants. Unless it's required to be competitive, we're going to look at it being like a formula grant or a directed type of a grant. And the second thing is, does it have to be a grant? Unless it's required in the state proviso or, you know, in the federal language to be a grant, can it be a contract instead? Also looking for other ways to improve efficiency is streamlining our grant applications to make it easier for our applicants to apply and ultimately receive funding, which our goal is to get those funds out to students to improve student outcomes. Also, like I mentioned earlier, just to improve our grant processes in general, to make it easier for them to start claiming funds. And I think Alyssa is going to speak a little bit more to the streamlining the grant application process. We also solicited feedback from our external users of the new system on ways that we can improve the new system and make it more user-friendly for them. And then we're also using reports, and we recently implemented dashboards on how to measure our success and use that data to, you know, make improvements along the way. Alyssa, I don't know if you want to add anything here.
Sure. And I would say before we even think about the ways technology can make us more efficient, when we moved to our new grants management system, we thought about kind of like when you're moving to a new house and you want to pack up the very most important things to put into the U-Haul, but some things you might want to trash, recycle, donate. So we went through all of that information that we were collecting to make sure, do we really need this? Is somebody using this information for something? And so that was step one, and we did a lot of house cleaning there. And then being able to pre-populate information into the grant applications or have the application calculate things for the user. And most importantly, have validations which will check the applicant's answers and kind of give them a preliminary response to whether, you know, they're on the right track, so that by the time that application gets turned into us, sometimes it's ready to approve. And we also, like Amy was saying, we run reports out of the system so that we're not sending long blanket emails out to users. We're able to really identify where is the user at in their process and then send really specific directions to, that group of users. And so I would say
Great.
that's how we're, yes?
No, I was just going to say that's great. It sounds to me like you're using automation, but you're making a bunch of process changes that are kind of thoughtful and intentional,
Yeah.
in order to do that. And it's making it sounds to me like both the user experience for the grant applicant a little easier, and also to a large degree kind of making it so that your own staff can work on the high priority activities as opposed to the kind of more mundane. I'm very curious, and we've asked this question, I think, at least each of the last couple of years. What plans do any of you have to use artificial intelligence? And bluntly, 2 or 3 years ago, everybody thought, hey, that's the new silver bullet. It's going to be fantastic. But then when I asked, well, what have you tried? Nobody had tried anything. And my sense is maybe that's changing this year. Are any of you using artificial intelligence to help make your work easier or better or more impactful, or allow you to have your staff focus on the higher priority, more value add things?
So OBSJG is not currently using artificial intelligence, but I do see the potential in the use of AI in the grant making world with, streamlining the process for reviewing quarterly reports, looking at trends and sort of extracting emerging needs in the field with our grantees and really understanding what are the needs for technical assistance and training. But beyond the AI conversation, we are really looking at streamlining in a similar way of Alyssa and Amy at OBSJG with implementing the new GovGrant system as well. We're in our first year of the system, so we're in that sort of preliminary stage. We're still fact finding, trying to understand the impact of the system on our grantees, but really utilizing the human aspect of having office hours and training and feedback sessions with our grantees to understand, one, how can we improve this implementation? And two, what are they finding as successful and what are they finding as challenges in the process? And also turning that model internally with our staff members and having feedback sessions, multiple trainings and opportunities for us to grow, because similar to Amy and Alyssa, we were in a grants management software for many years and using multiple data collection tools, Excel spreadsheets, document repositories, and we were really looking to streamline the process for our grant making.
Scott, you had your hand raised a moment ago. Did you want to add something or ask?
Yeah, no, I do. I think from a tasks standpoint on the AI front, and I think this is consistent with what Jessica's saying, though a little bit of a different angle. I don't expect that what we'll see is the idea of AI in grants management, but it is coming. And where I think we'll see it is that the tasks that are automatable by machine tend to be grouping and counting. And so financial management component of grants management is going to, within a couple of years, start to become more heavily automated through AI, specifically AP, potentially timekeeping, payroll, and then financial reporting, whether it's preparing budget to actual reports or preparing final reports that a human then reviews to submit.
Yeah.
And there's two reasons I think that. One is that just that set of tasks naturally lends itself to a machine being able to do that, a relatively capable machine. But two, the grants, despite how much money is in grants, I don't think vendors will fully respond to grants managers' needs in the way that the much larger financial management systems industry will respond to those underlying tasks that are a big part of grants.
Yeah. So I want to ask, and I've asked this a couple of years, how many of our panelists, and since most of you are on video, just raise your hand, how many of our panelists have seen a grant application where some of the narrative text appears to have been written by AI? I don't see any of our panelist hands raised, but I do see it looks like about 5 or 6 audience member hands raised. Do any of our panelists want to offer any feedback? Okay.
I guess I'll share,
Sorry.
Jeff, I'll share some feedback, and I'll also just kind of align it with the results of the survey and sort of our anchoring task of the morning. Being able to see the experience of the grant managers with more than 6 years was really encouraging. But also, when we talk about this concept of efficiency, experience matters. Um, you know, I can look at an application, I can look at a project at a excited, well-meaning, aspiring new grantee or new community organization and see them biting off much more than they can chew. And having the experience of having seen organizations and having seen grants being given to community organizations that have the best intention, but can offer suggestions to see them succeed, having seen organizations not be successful. And that experience matters. That experience matters of having technical grant managers who have been through several administrations. When I see that expertise of 10 years or more, who have some tools in their tool belts that can actually say, and advise in ways that I've seen this, I've been here before, and the tools that I've got from experience can lend themselves to the expertise of helping you succeed. And while automation for writing and numeration are important, efficiency really does come from the experience of a talented grant management workforce. And so I think where there are tools like GovGrants that give us the opportunity to be able to shrink that the bureaucracy and the technical pieces of grant management to really highlight and increase the human element of us having time to sit with grantees and be able to share that experience and background and examples of other successful programs, being able to have grant managers to have a greater bandwidth where there's less money, where there's a smaller pot of federal funding or local funding, to be able to share technical assistance and examples of how to improve your finances, how to, work with your board. That for me is the efficiency that we're working on. We're really proud of our capacity building program where we have a separate contractor that works independent of all of our decision makers and grant managers that goes through like a fine-tooth comb. He always says, we get all in your business. And that's his colloquial way of saying, we want to review your finances. We want to review your board so that you can be competitive both for OVSJG and beyond. And it takes that level of experience to gain the trust for grantees to be open enough to go through that experience. But we're really, really proud of that. And we know that these tools are tools, but those tools that are that come with experience are also just as valuable to efficiency.
So let me ask, and this is based on one of the comments in the chat. It was from a little bit back. A number of the folks in the audience are nonprofits, and they may in some cases be grantors, and they may, I suspect in many cases, be grant recipients. And they've said, we don't really have the ability to braid funds quite so easily. We don't have multiple sources. If our federal funding gets cut, we're just kind of out of luck. And so my question is whether or not our panelists, who are primarily representing government agencies and have a substantial grantor role, although some of them are also grant recipients, do any of you have advice you would like to offer for a nonprofit? And I might ask the same sort of thing because I think there's kind of some individual security concern, which is I might lose my job. And I suspect, again, many of those folks may work for nonprofits. Any advice for those folks from you as panelists?
I would say use the tools that exist. So at OVSJG, we also contract with that same consultant to offer grant writing, support sessions, pre-bidder RFA sort of webinars where they can learn about the funding sources and the use of them, and really use information as power and understand the impact of the funds and what the audience for these funds are, and then use that to tailor your grant applications.
Okay. Let's move on. The next topic is measuring impact. Ashley, if you could advance the slides. And again, I think this is a little bit in response to an issue that's been around a long time, which is how do we prove the value of what we're doing, especially since the folks who provide the money are well removed from the beneficiary with the grantor and the grantee in between. So the question is, what should the grants community do to be able to kind of improve and communicate impact? And what I want to do is I want to go particularly to the kind of the third topic, which is compliance versus support. And in a preparation call, we had a little bit of discussion, I think it was Alyssa and I, about, using a little bit of a carrot and a little bit of a stick to kind of get compliance and to kind of get performance to improve, but also perhaps to be able to measure impact. Alyssa, do you want to offer your thoughts on that?
Sure. And I mean, I agree with the challenge, right? Because at OSPI, we are the state education agency, and it's very difficult to isolate how any one particular funding source ultimately impacted third grade reading scores. But where we have really tried to focus our energies, our state superintendent has a goal around customer service and just recognizing that collecting information and kind of micromanaging our grantees does pull their attention away from implementing the activities of the grant program. So we've tried to focus our efforts on providing training and support and customer service. And I'd say one of the areas of success there, as I believe one of my colleagues also mentioned before, our office hours, where we have a breakout room with all of the different grant programs, as well as some administrative aspects of grants. And so the grantees can pop in and they can go to one breakout room to get help logging in. They can go to another breakout room to get help with their grant application, another great breakout room to get help with their program review. And through that, we've been able to speak to some of our most rural districts that weren't reaching out to us before and develop those relationships and support. And Amy, I know you're also involved in our program review process.
Yeah, thanks, Alyssa. So my team performs the federal fiscal section of program review, which is subrecipient monitoring. And like Alyssa mentioned earlier, our state superintendent, the focus is really on customer service. And instead of it being like an audit-like approach, it's more customer service supported and providing technical assistance instead of, trying to find audit, findings per se, which I think has really lent itself well to our interactions with school districts, charters, tribals that we perform subrecipient monitoring on. They really appreciate that, we're here to support them and provide technical assistance, which hopefully will prevent an audit finding down the road, right? But it's more of a partnership, a collaborative relationship, and we're seeing that positive results in the meetings that we have with the school districts, charters, tribals, and also in the survey results that we see at the end of our review cycle.
I'm going to ask a really provoking question, which may or may not be even kind of hurtful, which is, I think that kind of one of the attitudes the federal government has at this point is, we're not sure what we're getting for the money. Why do we spend this money? Maybe we should spend less money. And I think that kind of skepticism applies at least as much, maybe more so, to the grants management community as it does to the federal government at large, because again, it's a little more, the beneficiaries are a little more removed. And what I find is, I'll give a specific example, and then I'm going to ask a question, not about the example, but in general. Specific example is that our company recently helped automate some of the tools that are used to support victims of human trafficking. And they had previously used email and spreadsheets, and we helped them automate something. And they said, oh, that's great. Now it takes me less time to process each application for certification that you've actually been a member or a victim of human trafficking. And it was not really until I stepped in and said, well, let me, from the kind of the layperson who's not knowledgeable about this program, not knowledgeable about the technology, let me, as kind of the common idiot, say, what do I expect? What do I want? Well, I think what I would want is for the victims to be certified quickly and accurately, and for that to be done as efficiently as possible, with which you can read by meaning, with as little federal labor as possible, and perhaps in a way that minimizes the kind of the awkwardness and the of trying to prove you're a victim of human trafficking, because often that may be something that's kind of embarrassing and unpleasant. And so at the end of the day, I suggested, well, here are 2 or 3 very simple performance measures. How many victims of trafficking have you served, and how long does it take you to serve them? And the before and after perspective was, well, after the automation was implemented, it was possible for the agency, with a bunch of performance and process changes as well, to serve twice as many victims of human trafficking with the same number of staff. And the staff actually were not dissatisfied. It was not as if they were being whipped to work harder. They were happy with the result. And each victim was able to get their certification, if it was approved, in half the amount of time as previously was the case. And what's more, instead of 5 different federal agencies with 5 different types of benefits needing to accept the certification, and certify and interview the victim independently and having them prove their victimhood to 5 different agencies, all of the agencies accepted the singular certification. So it was kind of a win-win-win all around. And I guess my question for you is that simple rule of thumb, which is don't ask a program expert what they want from the program. Don't ask really the finance people even what they want from the program. Kind of ask the common man or the common woman what they think the program should be achieving. So my question for any of you panelists is there an opportunity, do you think, to get better and more resonant performance measures that are quantifiable by not, by bringing in some sort of lay people who could be, frankly, a city council member, or perhaps, someone who's not necessarily an academic, but, having a citizens forum, or having a kind of a discussion amongst beneficiaries. Is anyone doing that now? Do you think that could provide measures that would be beneficial and bluntly advocating for, hey, we've been successful and this program is worth funding. Here's what will happen if you cut funding. Would that work? Would that be helpful?
I can briefly speak to this. So we have the performance measurement initiative, which it was designed based off of the performance measurement tool that the federal government uses, and that was implemented at our agency over 10 years ago to really understand the reach of the full entire victim services portfolio, understanding that not one metric is one size fits all, and that can't get insight into a specific grantee or what community they're serving, but really trying to get the outcomes and the outputs of each program and be able to quantify that. And we use that data, but we make budget requests to the mayor and city council to show the impact of our program. So a few years ago, what we did was we understood that we were asking for a lot of metrics, and with all of the reporting requirements and other things that grantees have to do, it's important that these metrics make sense for them and the populations they serve. So we created sort of listening and feedback sessions on the metrics and redesigned them and co-designed them with our grantees, because they're often hearing from the clients that they serve, and they're the experts, and the clients that they serve are also the experts in their own lives. So using their knowledge base to better design metrics to really assess our programs is the direction we headed in.
Yes, may I follow up? Have you seen those metrics and the data or the changes in them be influential with policymakers for your program?
Yeah, so in our budget request process, we use those KPIs that we sort of gather from our grantees to give the evidence that the need for these funds are real, and there's concrete evidence that this population needs services. So, it's an iterative process, and council and the budget team and the mayor are looking at not only OBSJG, but all agencies' performance metrics to continue to justify our agency's operations.
And that's a really nice distinction between, hey, we not only have a need for services, but we're doing a good job meeting them. Let's switch gears to the topic 4. If you could advance the slide, please, Ashley. And Scott, I want to start you out here because, again, you have a great broad perspective. What types of training have been the most important for grant management expertise? And what do you, in your crystal ball, think will be the most important in the coming years?
Well, for decades and for decades to come, unless the federal government really embraces fixed amount awards, it'll be financial management related training, the grants management components that involve cost allocation, and then of course the federal cost principles, cost allowability, and the issues that surround that. That has been and always will be in a cost reimbursement environment the most important area. Now that said, over time, the ancillary skill sets in grants management, what I call skill sets in ancillary areas, sort of evolve. And I would say in the coming 2 years, an area that has been perhaps less an area of focus, that will be a major area of focus will be civil rights compliance, Title VI, Title VII compliance, even though Title VII is technically an employment law area. I think over the next year, we'll see a lot of training and education in that area arise. It's a focus of the current administration, certainly.
And I'm going to aim this next question at you, Lori, because again, you have a broad perspective and then any other panelist can jump in. But the last topic on the screen, which is how would you make a pitch to a prospective recruit that's potentially interested in grants management? Hardly anybody starts out, graduates college and says, hey, I want to be a grants manager, but how would you recruit people in this day and age?
Yeah, right now, I as we've talked earlier, the opportunities seem to be endless, and especially for grant managers that are have both the not just the knowledge of the programs, but of the people and the impacts that they're doing for the communities. So basically I would be pitching the opportunities, the challenges that can be overcome. I mean, a lot of people, myself included, like a good challenge. So, challenging positions that have a lot of potential to help agencies help the community out. It's it takes a village to raise a child, and the same can be said for a successful grant management program. You need everyone in that village helping and assisting. So basically it would mainly be just the different aspects from that are available, the different opportunities available right now, and that will continue to grow, how valuable making sure that the public funds are spent effectively and efficiently, would be a big impact for any organization.
And Jennifer, you'd like to add something?
I would. I think most of us start out in our careers wanting to help people and change our communities. And I think grant making is one of the most impactful ways to amplify our individual impact. We're really proud here in the District of Columbia. We've had a 35% reduction in violent crime, about a 41% reduction in gun violence. And that has all been because of community-led efforts. And we know that those individuals who are closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And so being able to be a grant maker and be able to fund community-led, community succeeding efforts, we know there's sustainability in that. And so for each of us who know we all have a shelf life, we all have, periods of burnout in our individual and collective efforts, when we're able to fund community-based resources, it is so impactful. And so I think that's something when we're able to look back at this 35% reduction, we know to prevent trauma in our community, we have to heal trauma. And where we believe in something, where our priorities are, we have to resource it. We have to fund it. And it takes really qualified and technically excellent individuals to be able to do that in a way that creates that impact in community. So I'm really proud of the work that we do. And I think work. We also have a really robust internship program. Everywhere that I've been in my career in leadership, we've always had interns. And I know that the interns who lead from our program go on to lead in the field and beyond. And so being able to work with young people to introduce them to the field, we fund in victim services unmarked houses. We fund programs that individuals may never be able to see very loudly, but to see the impact as a grant maker is really, really gratifying. And so, yeah.
I'm hearing between the lines, you're recruiting right here now, Jen.
DC is hiring.
Yeah. Any other panelists like to add something before we close out?
I would just like to add, moving to a new grant system, like I mentioned before, it was a huge effort, especially for our internal users. And so we provided them just wraparound support. My team provides a lot of coaching and mentoring directly to those grant managers for every phase of the grants system for the grants process. We also have a lot of short targeted videos for each section of the grant system. We also meet weekly with REI and the grant managers to talk about any issues that are coming up, any questions, any concerns, which really helped, them feel supported, and then also foster that community partnership relationship internally with all the grant managers. Alyssa, did you want to add anything?
I would just reiterate that we hadn't had that community of grant managers across our large agency in the past, and that's been really wonderful to have colleagues doing that same work from other programs and then to help us align. So
Great.
thank you, Amy.
So I want to say one substantive thing and then thanks and close out the panel. The substantive thing is I really respect this community a huge amount. And the reason why is because I think in many instances, you're making an impact on individual people and improving their lives. But further than that, you're leveraging your impact. You are helping both get funding and get expertise, as well as ideas and communication to folks who will expand and multiply the impact that each of you have. And I think that's a great reason to be a grant manager. That is how I would pitch a recruiting pitch to folks to be hired as grant managers. And I think that realistically, this is an environment where, especially in the commercial sector, people are having to be flexible and where they're going to find their next job and what their core expertise is. And so again, my hope is that many of you who've shown some interest in helping carry out public sector missions with one grant organization, I hope you'll find opportunities for advancement and professional fulfillment with that organization. I hope you'll look around at other grant management organizations as well if you do not, because as you've heard from some of our panelists, there are folks who are hiring now, and there's, I think, a great deal of optimism about the need for your skills and expertise in not just the coming years, but in even just the coming months. So with that, I'd like to say a great thanks to our panelists for sharing your expertise and to helping strengthen the community of grants managers. I'd like to thank the National Grants Managers Association for helping create the professional community, sharing its newsletter and its training. And I'd like to also thank George Washington University for its contributions to thought leadership in the grants management field. As has been exchanged in the chat, we will make both a video recording of this event as well as the slides and provide those full slides with the full survey results to everyone who registered. So thank you all very much. And for REI Systems, this is Jeff Myers. I appreciate your time and attention and your service to the public.